welcome officially to our speaker series. This is the Rotary Club of Worldwide Impact, and through our series, we explore exciting ideas that are shaping our future, and we are so motivated by this. My name is Dewin Justiniano, and alongside with me, my dear friend and colleague Patrick Hardiman, we will be your host today. We're both honored to be part of this club and to have the opportunity to connect with such an inspiring group of people. As you know, Rotary International is a global network of more than 1.4 million neighbors, friends, leaders, and problem solvers in more than 46,000 clubs around the world, all united with the common goal of making a positive impact in our communities and in the global network that we have. As a Rotary Club, we approach every conversation as an opportunity to learn and to grow together. Our goal is to connect with and hear from fascinating and inspiring speakers, often with a message focused on the power of ideas to change lives and, of course, ultimately to change our world. Whether you are a seasoned member or just tuning in for the first time, we hope to bring a little inspiration, and what a better opportunity that tonight through our speakers. And through these, we are sure that this will allow you to think about how you can make a difference as well. Today, we are honored of speaking with two outstanding doctors, Dr. Hotez and Dr. Bottazzi, who are renowned for their pioneer work in treating diseases that disproportionately affect the world core. Together, they led the team that developed the CORBEVAX vaccine, if I'm pronouncing that correct, CORBEVAX vaccine, which received emergency use authorization in India and has been instrumental in the fight against COVID-19. Their efforts were recognized by the global community, and in 2022, Dr. Hotez and Dr. Bottazzi were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for their work to develop and distribute the low-cost COVID-19 vaccine to people of the world without patent limitation. We are truly honored and excited to have them on our series tonight, as their work not only highlights the importance of the global health and accessibility, but also exemplifies the true meaning of service above self. This is going to be truly enlightening, an enlightening conversation. So sit back, relax, get ready, take your pen and paper, take some notes, and get ready to be inspired and motivated by our amazing speakers tonight. Doctors, welcome again. Thank you for accepting our invitation. We are more than happy and delighted to have the two of you with us tonight. I'll now hand the mic to you.
Well, thanks so much. I think Maria Elena and I agreed that I would start and talk for a few minutes, and then Maria Elena would proceed from there. We're thrilled to be here. I have a long association with Rotary International. Before coming to Texas 12 years ago, I was president of the Sabin Vaccine Institute, named after, of course, Albert Sabin, who was instrumental in developing the oral polio vaccine. And of course, Rotary International has had such an important and long-lasting legacy impact on reducing polio transmission, leading to the elimination. So I've been working with Rotarians for a long, long time, and I'm coming here with great admiration for everything you're doing. And it's in that spirit that Mary Elena and I came to Texas 12 years ago to this amazing Texas Medical Center, and we invite you to all come and visit. We do everything big in Texas. Texas Medical Center is the world's largest. It's the first medical city, really, of 60 institutions and 4 medical schools and 110,000 employees, and the MD Anderson Cancer Center, which is world-renowned, the Texas Children's Hospital, which is the number 2 children's hospital in the United States after Boston Children's, the Baylor St. Luke's, Baylor College of Medicine. And it's really something to behold. It has more buildings than downtown Los Angeles. That's just the medical center. And we came here with the idea that we want to do something big. And the concern was when it comes to global health and making vaccines for poverty-related diseases, the narrative was too focused on the multinational pharma companies. The pharma companies do a lot of good things. They provide a lot of vaccines for the Gavi Alliance, including polio vaccine, but we'd become too dependent and relying them on exclusively. And there was a need to balance out that vaccine ecosystem with organizations that would make vaccines that the pharma companies ordinarily wouldn't make, especially vaccines of regional importance on the African continent and the poorest regions of Southeast Asia and Latin America. We're talking about vaccines for diseases such as schistosomiasis, which causes female genital schistosomiasis, affecting 40 million girls and women living in extreme poverty on the African continent, hookworm infection, Chagas disease, which affects people living in poverty in Latin America, leishmaniasis. And it was in that spirit that we began also, and I say we, it's called the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development, and it's co-headed by Maria Elena and I. We've been science partners now for over 20 years, trying to not only make interesting vaccines, but also create some kind of sustainable financial business model, which we can actually get these vaccines developed largely in the nonprofit sector. So about 10 years ago, we noticed that coronavirus vaccines were orphaned as well. So there was no one making vaccines for severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, that arose out of South China in 2002 and then affected Toronto, nor Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome that arose out of the Arabian Peninsula and affected Korea. So we started making those vaccines as well. And our approach is to use, whenever possible, technology that's compatible with low and middle income country vaccine producers. And so many of them, including the ones we'll talk about today in India and Indonesia, make their own recombinant protein hepatitis B vaccine. And that's done through a process known as microbial fermentation in yeast. It's been around a few decades. It's one of the lowest cost technologies, incredible safety profile, been given to millions and millions of kids all over the world with no untoward effects. So whenever possible, we use that approach. And we were doing this for not only our parasitic diseases vaccines, but also for SARS and MERS. And then when the COVID-19 sequence came online in January of 2020, we went to work and we got permission to work in the labs at a time when a lot of the medical centers, the non-essential, only the essential parts of the medical center for patient care were open. Our scientists got permission, and they now took that approach that was successful for SARS and MERS and pivoting it to COVID-19. And we developed a low-cost recombinant protein vaccine technology that was then transferred. We did the tech transfer to 4 vaccine producers in LMICs, low and middle income countries, in India and Bangladesh and Indonesia and ultimately Botswana. And India went the furthest. The major company there is known as Biological E, and they did an amazing job of scale up. We were on Zoom calls with them day and night, actually sending our production cell bank without a patent, because, you know, as I often said, is when your house is on fire, you don't call a patent attorney, you call the fire department, and we wanted to be the fire department. So with no patent, and they did an extraordinary job scaling it up and working day and night with them, and ultimately led to CORBEVAX, which was given to 75 million kids in India, 75 million doses administered, another 10 million plus adult boosters. And then we did the same with Indonesia, and where it's known as Indovac. So we're hitting the 100 million dose administered mark. So it goes to show you that I think, provide a proof of concept that you don't have to be a multinational pharma company to still do big things. And I think the one part that I would like as a takeaway from this Rotary call is how we can work with Rotary on our other vaccines, because I do think there are going to be continued opportunities. So let me hand it over to my brilliant colleague, Dr. Bottazzi, and to finish out the formal part, and then I guess we'll do Q&A.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks for the brilliant category you gave me.
I only speak the truth, by the way.
Well, it's also for me a great pleasure. I also grew up very close to Rotary. I grew up in Honduras. I'm Italian by birth, but I grew up in Honduras, and my uncle is a Rotarian forever. And so I've been always surrounded by Rotarians. And now, in fact, with the great privilege that, with my colleague here in the Zoom call, GB from Italy, now I'm even a member of the Rotary Club in Genova. And like Peter said, I think sometimes that feel, that connectivity with not only individuals, but with groups like you all represent worldwide, is really what enables us to create that impact that you introduced us, Darwin. And also very proud that you are a fellow Honduran. So I'm very happy that you are moderating this with us. But so let me then expand a little bit on what Peter said. And on a personal note, I think that it was very important for me that being a microbiologist, and living and working with pathogens and pathogens that afflict a lot of poor people, that my career eventually, hopefully, would become a career of service. And so I was very lucky that when I met my brilliant partner, Dr. Hotez, we basically had exactly the same mentality. And then when we started kind of creating what we call our guiding principles, because at the end of the day, as you all have, we also as a group and as a fellow scientist and with our team and with our institutions, with our leaders, we knew that we had to be very clear of what our values were and what our guiding principles had to drive our decisions scientifically. And we rapidly realized that, of course, science is important. The technology, the concepts of biotechnology, microbiology, vaccine development was important, but it was much more important to also ensure that we did things with community engagement. By community is not only the people, but also groups that would enable us. And so the concept of partnership was important, and that's why, in fact, our vaccine center operates under this concept of partnership, of product development partnership approaches. And at the same time, beyond having these partnerships, that these partnerships needed to be culturally intelligent. And I am going to use that word because when we understood that not everything had to be done with multinationals, and multinationals is because it has this connotation of high income countries, and of course, of a great economic power, but that we also wanted to empower and decolonize and ensure that our partnerships were not just a one-way street, that the lab in Texas is the only one giving things away, is that it had to be two ways, because at the end we needed to empower and enable sustainability. And I think that combination of being cognizant of that principle and the cultural intelligence is what really allowed us to forge these strong collaborations, in our case, with the low middle income country settings, right? With the manufacturers, with the people, with the governments, with the universities and other research institutions there, to really build something that it was not just a handover. So it's not just a one-way tech transfer that we create in our labs and then we just give it away and then let them figure out or what to do with it. And I think that's what ultimately now the fashionable term is vaccine diplomacy, because as you know, anything that has the aspiration of collaboration and partnerships and empowerment and sustainability requires a lot of diplomacy, right? It's not easy to work with people, right? And people with different cultures and people with different knowledge and people with different intents, right? And so I think that the success that we had was that for 22 plus years now, everybody in our team has the same mentality and the same guiding principles, that we, of course, apply science with that diplomatic engagement and intent. And that's why then, to put a little bit the puzzle together, we needed, like Peter mentioned, that our technologies that we would, of course, develop and create had to be culturally appropriate. Like, for example, Peter mentioned Indonesia. In Indonesia, as you know, the majority of their population are of Muslim religious background, right? So they're majority Muslim countries, and the region where they are, they ideally would serve in a Muslim majority region. So when we decided to use our technology of microbial fermentation, we knew that yeast was very special because yeast was practically a vegan technology, right? It doesn't require any animal-derived products. It doesn't require any serum, for example, bovine serum and things like that. And for us to therefore provide that technology for the possibility of getting even certification as a halal technology, we needed to think very intentionally of how we would document so that we could provide the information to those who do these reviews so that they would eventually be able to give a stamp of halal readiness. But if you don't think with that culturally intelligent, intent, maybe we wouldn't have documented it, right? So again, as you can see, I think our labs and our people and our scientists and our institutions go beyond just doing the science for the benefit of course doing scientific innovation and knowledge. We also ensure that it is very culturally appropriate and intelligent. And then Peter also brought up this concept of open science, right? So the decision that we either remove barriers, limit barriers, that doesn't mean we don't patent. Sometimes we do. There's ways of protecting, of course, your knowledge and your know-how, mostly so that others, of course, don't come and also put any barriers on you. But when we started working on diseases that are for pandemic importance, not even knowing when a pandemic would even happen, right? We knew that for sure, for those types of interventions, the worst that we could have is on top of the complexities of doing the science and of course, doing all the collaborations and transfer of technologies. On top, we had to bring in a lot of complex contracts and documents that would, limit the incentivation and even the empowerment of others to replicate our work. And that's why ultimately we ended up with a strategy of publishing openly, so that enables open science, a strategy of, again, of creating teams and collaborations that would join forces and be very interdisciplinary, that we would, of course, try to incentivize empowerment and decolonization so that they would feel, the receiver of our work, that they would feel empowered to call it their own. And you mentioned in your intro the name CORBEVAX, and Peter mentioned Indovac. Those are brand names of our technology, but that they are very much owned by India and Indonesia, right? We kind of handed it over to them. It's not our name, it's not terminology, is their terminology. And so therefore, the Indonesians and the Indians feel very proud that they were able to get their internal, manufacturers and governments really enable this work. And I think that's the value, right? The value. And that's why ultimately, and maybe Peter in the discussion can speak a little bit more about this, that we also knew that we were having some very difficult challenges with hesitance, with acceptance, and therefore the communicating of our science also has to be very honest, very true, and that ultimately people will grow trust also in the work that we do, not only from the work that we do in Texas and in the US, but also how the work in India and in Indonesia is trustworthy, and that it really abides by the utmost high levels of quality and regulation, so that people can, of course, accept such vaccines in this case. So we're very happy to be with you, very proud that we are ourselves representing really a team behind us that are as diverse as the Rotary Global Impact Group that you have. We have scientists from all over the world, but at the end, we also, our partnerships are all over the world. And so we're very happy to be able to tell our story. So not sure if you think now it's an appropriate time to maybe have a little bit more conversation so that you can hear and get some of your questions answered. Back to you, David and Patrick.
Thank you so much, doctors. I have to say personally, I'm astonished with all the work that you have done over the last years. It's incredible, the contributions that you have done to the world. Thank you so much for everything that you are doing. It's great. It's great to get to know more of the insights and details as you mentioned. And I'm so excited about the potential questions, and I'm so looking forward to the audience to interact and also share with all of you. And I would like to introduce my co-host and dear friend Patrick to continue these conversations with you and our colleagues. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Delwyn, and thank you, doctors, for your introduction, your speech, and the inspiration you gave to us. I think in the last few years, the world has changed, and it's really cool and amazing to see how you can make an impact on a different way, a patent-free vaccine, for example. I will start off with a question I wrote down myself, because I think we're all honored to have guests here nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. Could you describe your reactions on being nominated, and how does it feel to be in a different league than the rest of the world?
Well, I could start out. Go ahead, Mary. Go ahead. All right. Yeah, I mean, it was very exciting, and mostly because it was an independent validation that we were doing something of substance and that was world changing. I mean, everybody was kind of talking about vaccine access, and everyone was wringing their hands about vaccine equity, especially during the 2021 and into 2022, when the ministers of health, ministers of science from countries all over the world realized that the mRNA vaccines were not coming, or not coming anytime soon. And everyone was saying, oh, what a terrible pity it was that people on the African continent and South Asia and elsewhere in Central America did not have vaccine access. And it was not only a humanitarian catastrophe, but it was terrible even for the high income countries, because the Delta variant arose out of an unvaccinated population out of India in early 2021. Omicron and its subvariants arose out of an unvaccinated population out of Southern Africa and later in 2021, and that's still haunting us. And so it was not only the right thing to do for a humanitarian perspective, but it was in our own enlightened self-interest for the Western European countries, Central European countries, and North American countries as well. So everybody's wringing their hands, and the flaw was thinking that what you do is you empower the multinational pharma companies and incentivize them with billions of dollars. And then eventually the crumbs filter down to the low and middle income countries. And we knew that was a flawed strategy from the beginning. And we provided proof of concept that we could do big things, as I mentioned, with low and middle income country vaccine producers directly. But it was nice having that independent validation from the Nobel nomination, because it said to the world, yeah, maybe these guys are onto something. And you have to be careful, because you don't want to demonize the pharma companies either. It's not, they do a lot of good for the world and provide a lot of vaccines for the Gavi Alliance and polio vaccine, et cetera. But recognizing that we need more balance. And so the Nobel nomination was a recognition of that balance, the need for that balance. Maria Elena, go ahead.
Yes, I think for me, it definitely, I mean, validation, because of course, also we got more visible, right? work that we've been doing, and we've been doing it for more than 2 decades. And I think finally people noticed, right, of the approach that we were doing. But at the same time, when you get that those news, certainly it's a responsibility now, right? It's a responsibility not only to tell the story so people can get, of course, inspired, but to ensure that the story can be repeated as much as we can, right? That it wasn't just a one-off, oh yeah, it only happened because all the stars align, and it's like a one-time deal, scenario. And I have to say that because of that nomination, people really rapidly recognize that sometimes, of course, you always expect that when you have emergencies, people rally and countries rally to help each other. Maybe the pandemic told us that sometimes we could help each other more than what we did, but that also we should also not expect that we should be just waiting for people to come and rescue us. So a lot of countries, communities, even research institutions, certainly the manufacturers, realize that we cannot afford to have a world just of full of follow-ons, right? People follow, that you sometimes have to take ownership and leadership. And for that, again, goes back to, they need to learn how to be self-sufficient. Not only we are self-reliant, right? So many of the low middle income countries are very reliant. We have countries that all the time go through, not only climate disasters, political, instabilities, you name it. And on top, you have to deal with, not being able to even come to the rescue of your own health, or people's health. And I think that was a lesson. So I think for me was just an ability to really tell the story and to now show that this approach that we've been advocating for, that it is, that we can teach others, enable others, that sometimes simple technologies are culturally appropriate with the right intent and the right investments, can leave a legacy that, that permit others to then, be self-sufficient and not wait for others to come and help, and really affect a lot of people that usually are the last who receive these types of interventions.
Thank you so much. Amazing. I would want to urge my guests, if you have any questions, please raise your digital hand. I've got some questions via the chat, and I saw the first question coming in from Mustafa. Mustafa, do you want to address your question, please?
Yeah, sure. My question, as an you guys are expertise in developing vaccines, how much usually it takes to develop a vaccine and make sure that it's actually safe to the public, especially in the COVID-19 case. The vaccine came up like in almost 9 months or almost a year, and most of the people were really kind of quite afraid to take it, especially like it didn't take that time to stand with the have enough trials and make sure that it doesn't have any side effects and so on. So as you are an expert in such a field, how long that usually takes
So I
to
think
make sure that the vaccine is actually safe for the public?
So I think this was an instance where, one of the problems with Operation Warp Speed in the United States and similar programs in Europe was there was no control over the company CEOs for their communication. So, as I often would say, when a pharma company CEO does a press release, that press release is not meant for you or for me. It's meant for the shareholders to jack up the price of the stock. And they were very effective in doing that. But it also created a lot of uncertainty, because the truth is these vaccines did not come up in 9 months or 7 weeks or all the other numbers people throw out. They came up over more than a 10-year period, because over that 10-year period, while making SARS and MERS vaccines, the hardest part was identifying the appropriate target for the vaccine. and that we and other groups over the last decade had shown that the spike protein was the most efficient target, and especially the receptor binding domain. How do you deliver the spike protein? How you measure virus neutralizing antibodies, how you shape virus neutralizing antibodies as a correlate of protection. And all of that 10 years of work fed into the development of the COVID-19 vaccine, because then it was just a matter of doing the same kinds of studies for the slightly different sequence of COVID-19 compared to SARS and MERS. And in turn, the RNA platform had been shaped over 2 decades of work. So this built on 20 years of R&D, and that's research and development. And I think that point I tried to make when I was being interviewed on the cable news channels in 2020. And if I think we had pushed harder on that message, people would have felt a lot more comfortable. And then following that, the clinical trials were quite substantial in size, right? 40,000 in the Pfizer trial, I think, or 60,000 in the Moderna trial, or maybe it was the inverse, but you get the idea. Those are not small clinical trials. Those are equivalent trials to just about any licensed vaccine. So the truth is the time frame was not so short, and the size of the clinical trials and the power of the clinical trials and how robust they were pretty standard fare. But we did not have that control of communications, and I think we're still paying the price for that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I can add to that the fact that, of course, the amount of funding that was given and allocated specifically to enable these trials or the manufacturing, right? So one of the things that usually happen is, as you're doing trials, the producer doesn't necessarily produce millions of doses, right? They usually leave it a little bit at the end until after you see the results. In this case, they actually accelerated where a lot of the manufacturers produced at risk and said, we're going to make the millions of doses as much as they could at that time, based on, of course, their ability. In case, if it works, we already don't have to start producing until we know that it works. So it was a risk for the producer. So there were a lot of things that, the money, of course, enabled, because we don't usually get that amount of money, right? In a business as usual scenario. The manufacturers did a lot of producing and scaling at risk. That networks of trials were already there. So everybody, again, joined forces and expanded their collaboration. But the science was already there, right? They didn't start from scratch. In fact, our own group, started a coronavirus program in 2011. So we had already pretty much, almost, a decade of knowing how to do our technology. And, at some level, I knew that we could reproduce it for COVID-19, for SARS-2. And we definitely, what we did, maybe in 6-7 years, we managed to do it in 2-3 months, because we didn't have to do all the, beginnings of the, scientific thought process. So it was very, very easy. And we had the teams, and a lot of people maybe had, the factories. They had maybe some of the consumables. So again, it was all orchestrated, because there was a lot of behind the scenes knowledge. And I think that's one of the things that now the world is struggling, right? Is, if we continue to invest in R&D sustainably for many diseases, including neglected diseases and possibly potential of other pandemic diseases, that there's clearly a value, right? Because if you hit with a pandemic of a pathogen that you've never really studied before, then we would have been in trouble, right? Here we were lucky because we had decades of already having worked and invested in the R&D.
Oh, thank you so much. Great question, great insights in the process. I'll go to one of the questions I received in the chat. Let me see some questions here. Our president Raquel asked, how do you think the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the importance of global health and cooperation? Could you shine your ideas on that question?
Well, I guess I'll begin. It showed the best and worst of global cooperation. I mean, the best was the community of biomedical scientists collaborated like they never have before. And together with the journal editors, we were putting up all of our findings on preprint servers such as bioRxiv and medRxiv, and being selfless in terms of sharing results early to each other so we could all work together, not only on vaccines, but also for drugs and diagnostics and for modeling of the pandemic. And I think that could change forever the way we do scientific publishing and data sharing and looking at big data, big science. It also exposed every weakness in every national health system in the US. You know, it clearly showed some major deficiencies. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC in the US, that missed the entry of the virus that came from Southern Europe. Everyone was worried about it coming in from China, doing travel restrictions. And then the virus came in from Southern Europe and ignited the terrible epidemic in New York City. And we had a lot of trouble getting mathematical modeling underway, forecasting underway, diagnostic testing, genomic sequencing. Now things are measuring vaccine effectiveness. Now things are much better. So hopefully things will autocorrect on that front. I think the worst thing that it exposed, other than the equity issue that we started out talking about, was this terrible anti-vaccine activism, which really took off during COVID-19. It was already there. And I have firsthand experience of this because if you remember, the original fake assertion from the anti-vaccine groups were false claims that vaccines cause autism, and that I'd written a book which made me public enemy number 1 or 2, called Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, about my youngest daughter. And we had diffused a lot of that, but it had then the anti-vaccine movement in the US became a political movement linked to the far right and far right extremism around these concepts of health freedom and medical freedom. In fact, my newest book that'll be out in a few months is called The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, How Health Freedom Propaganda Endangers the World. And it really goes into the horrible fact that during the Delta and early Omicron waves, the last half of 2021 and early 22, 200,000 Americans needlessly died because they refused a COVID vaccine, even after vaccines became widely available. And they were victims. They were victims of politically inclined activists from the far right that made claims that the COVID vaccines were rushed or not safe, and it was amplified nightly on Fox News by the Fox News anchors, and this had deadly consequences, and not by small measures. 200,000 people needlessly died because of anti-vaccine activism, which I also call anti-science aggression, and the legacy of that remains. And now that US-style anti-vaccine activism on the far right is contaminating Canada through the Freedom Convoy we saw in 2022. It's in Western Europe, and it's in Germany big time, where it's also linked to far-right groups, in Austria to far-right groups, in France as well. This has become a new signature of the far-right extremism and even fascism, is falsely discrediting the science and the scientists. And I believe, this is going to be, and when you talk about killing forces right now in the United States, that anti-vaccine activism at 200,000 deaths is killing more Americans than gun violence or global terrorism or all the other things that we try to build infrastructure against. And I think this could be an important role for Rotary as well, as combating that kind of anti-vaccine activism that was made so clear during the pandemic.
Yes, and I think maybe I can just add, that point where what we've learned is that, again, collaboration is essential, but you have to continuously sustain and maintain collaborations. And I think that it's not just when you have a crisis that you create or build or strengthen these collaborations. And I think we understood that we need to do more of that. And I think that's why, for example, I'm very interested in seeing and learning of how the Rotary International has had those impacts, because it's clearly a very good example of how people from around the world that are guided from a very, common, I guess, vision and mission, but then everybody works very independently, right? And everybody addresses very independently. And I think, that is probably a model that can be replicated more and more, and even adapted to some of the more biotechnology or more scientific work. And just to give you an example, what we've seen now and again is this recognition that even, for example, within the government agencies, one of the things that was very interesting, at least to me, was we were not really working with a lot of Ministry of Health around the world. The groups that we ended up working the most to create this notion of, I guess, sustainable collaboration and empowerment and building local, I guess, strengthening infrastructure, was with the ministers of foreign affairs and with the ministers of economy, because I think that finally they realized that if you don't have good health, and if health collapses, of course the economy collapses, the industry collapses, and for some reason I think they always perceived that health was kind of like something that they should not get involved, that was kind of dealt with the ministers of health, and that those are just scientists that deal with that. And I think they finally recognized that they better be more involved in creating solutions, whether it's financial solutions, whether it's more economically driven solutions, because when health collapses, at the end of the day, the economy is what really collapsed. And I think they realize that. So I think that's also what another lesson learned, how we now hopefully humans don't have short memory, is that we can see more and more investment in the health sector by non-necessarily health sector groups.
Thank you so much. Janice, you unmuted the mic.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you very much for our doctors from Texas Children's. As a Baylor MD PhD student, and my husband is also a Baylor MD PhD under the late Tom Caskey, we worked. I'm really proud to see this work that you guys are doing and to represent the Texas Medical Center, which is certainly a part of my background. And I wanted to comment that I really appreciate your perspective on the pharmaceutical industry, as well as the nonprofit industry. My husband and I have, pretty much made our living in the pharma industry, not large pharma, more small to medium-sized pharma with orphan diseases and things like that. And simultaneously, I've done a lot of global health projects in developing countries all over the world, primarily East Africa and India. So I really appreciate your perspective on that fine balance between what pharma can and does provide for our world, and where the lack is, and where nonprofits and sort of taking out the monetary drive is also important. And I'm really happy that you made that point.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, the pharma companies do a lot of good, and we partner with them from time to time, and there's a lot of important innovation that goes on in the pharma companies. They invest a lot in the research and development, and I think you're right. It's striking that balance. So, oftentimes, it's interesting. I get accused of either being, they call me a shill for pharma, meaning that I'm an apologist for pharma. I'm secretly getting paid by pharma, which I'm not. Or I get accused of the opposite, which is that I have a conflict of interest and I'm in competition with pharma. And the truth is neither of those are true. But it's, in this very shrill environment, especially with social media, it's conveying nuance is getting increasingly difficult, but it's so important.
Yes, and from my side, Jan, as well, first, thank you for being also a fellow Baylor Texas Children's, and a note of the fact that the reason we were able to do what we did was by, definitely because we had the backing of the, of the highest leaders within our institutions, right? It's not easy to move along such an audacious goal, especially again with the intent of really doing global health and certainly benefit, the poorest people of the world, without having, of course, the backing of your leaders. So we're very happy, and I don't think we would have been able to do it if we would not have come down to Texas. And not only the institutions, but as you know, we also got an enormous support from the philanthropic nature of Texans and many other individuals and foundations. So we're very proud of doing that. And like you said, we, albeit large multinational pharmaceuticals, we love the small pharmaceutical and biotech collaborations, because we are kind of fellow travelers in kind of not only looking for funds, because as you know, everybody's always looking for funds, certainly in the area of orphan and diseases, which it's kind of like the parallelism with neglected diseases. Maybe we have a lot of people that are afflicted, but that they're poor. You have maybe a small number of populations that are afflicted, and therefore they're also neglected, because nobody thinks that, the investment is necessary, or ends up being, very costly. So thank you for your comment. We're very, very appreciative.
Most welcome.
Thank you so much. Time is running out, but we have some more questions. So people are in line to ask you guys questions. Arina, you had a question. Can I give you the floor for a final question?
Yeah, sure. I was wondering if there was also a community or country you tried to reach with your vaccine, but weren't able to be, for example, because the government wasn't up for it or for any other reason.
Well, we certainly tried multiple countries, and the hardest part were the countries that did not have vaccine development capacity, had never made a vaccine before, and to try to use this to hit the ground running, that was frustrating, knowing that it can take years to build a vaccine ecosystem. So we had a lot of discussions with countries like that, particularly on the African continent, but it was a sign that we need to build that capacity. And then there were countries that do have that vaccine development capacity, but chose ultimately to go in another direction. But the biggest frustration was the countries that just don't have that capacity to begin with, and we're now waking up for the first time during COVID. Hey, maybe we should be building our own vaccine infrastructure.
And from my side, I actually have to say, even though our priority was definitely to try to have our technology reach places where they could then produce for the people who were in most need, like India, Indonesia, we were a little disappointed that the US, nobody really was interested in our technology. It could have been with their eyes shut, making recombinant protein technology, in the US, it probably would have been very easy, most likely with a lot less money for the investment that we got to invest in RNA or even protein particle technologies or even the adenovirus technology, and the fact that the US did not at least select a simple protein technology, and it was a little disappointing. And I think now maybe they're actually going to pay the price, right? Because they only have RNA technology. That's the only option, right? Versus other countries maybe, have more flexibility. And even though they may have less economic power, they probably have the know-how and the interest. Again, to give you an example with Biological E, Biological E not only worked with us, and of course it ended up, developing CORBEVAX, but they certainly, collaborated with Johnson and Johnson, and they now are also learning how to do RNA, right? So they kind of said, we're going to do it all and then see which one actually is the one who's going to be the best and the fastest and the most appropriate. Some cases, like Peter said, that decisions may not necessarily were the right decisions, and now they may not have that option anymore.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you so much. Great questions from our guests and members. Insightful answers. Given the time and questions are still flowing in, so maybe the doctors can spare some time after the recording to answer some extra questions. But thank you so much. And Darwin, I will give the mic to you for rounding up our program for today.
Thank you. Absolutely, Patrick. I think before ending this amazing speech, I would really like all of us, maybe we can open our microphones and give a virtual and warm applause to our speakers. It's amazing, and we are very delighted to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much. It was very insightful to learn from your perspective, your experience. And absolutely, thank you everyone for tuning in and being part of this enlightening conversation. We hope you learn many things and gain a deeper understanding of the important work being done to fight diseases. You may be hearing our speaker series on your favorite podcast service, watch it on our YouTube channel, or you can view it on our club website. If you enjoy this program, please share it with a friend, with your colleagues, with your family, and please don't forget to leave us a good rating. We love 5 stars. And please remember that if you are inspired, get involved, get engaged in all these amazing initiatives so we all can contribute and make a difference in our communities. We invite you to learn more about Rotary International and our Rotary Club of Worldwide Impact. So with that, I'd like to thank again to Dr. Hotez and Dr. Bottazzi for sharing their invaluable knowledge and expertise with us during this session. And turning it back to them for one last word, please. We want to give you the floor again for a final remark. Thank you.
I'll just say it's again an honor to be part of the programs of Rotary International. We've have a long-standing commitment to working with Rotary, and we hope that programs like this will help jumpstart future initiatives. We have a lot of vaccines to get out there and deliver, and there's no one who does vaccine advocacy at scale like Rotary International, and both not only ensuring vaccine equity, but now combating anti-vaccine activism. So we hope that this is the first of future dialogues.
Yes, and from me again, thanking everyone. This has been quite pleasant. I love having these more conversational gatherings, and we're here with Peter for any time that you need any help, any support, joining more of your series, and very much look forward to learning more about other initiatives that you have and how we can help and contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much again. I also want to thank my co-host and dear friend Patrick. It's been a pleasure to share one more series with you, and thank you, team, all our colleagues and members of Worldwide Impact, and to all our special guests and colleagues who joined tonight. And once again, our deepest gratitude to Dr. Hotez and Dr. Bottazzi. It's been an amazing night sharing with you and learning from your vast experience. So with that, we close our series tonight and see you next time. Thank you so much for joining.